speaker?
Yes. Dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to introduce you once more to this space of IPA webinars. This is a long-term project organized by the website editorial committee devoted to the discussion of central psychoanalytical topics as well as interdisciplinary contributions on related themes. The IPA worldwide structure enhances the possibility of this open interregional dialogue to share our experiences around the world. The title of today's webinar is Psychoanalytical Explorations on Femininity. Co-ops work around the world on violence, misogyny, and female development. As you know, COAP is the acronym of the IPA Committee on Women and Psychoanalysis. From its foundation in 1998, this committee has been involved continuously in the study of scientific, social, political, and professional problems related to women and gender from a psychoanalytical perspective. I would like to highlight that it has been a very creative and productive group. It has greatly contributed to the enlightenment and updating of psychoanalytical concepts, as well as confronting prejudice that might hinder our development. This is also an opportunity to underline that COAP's members have created a wide interinstitutional network around the world. Proof of this interaction is the scope of the scientific production, fueled by many meetings and publications. Today, the organization of this webinar with panelists from all the IPA regions will show us how COAPS works by means of this open worldwide dialogue. But before handing over to our panel, I would like to make a brief introduction explaining how we are going to function. The webinar has two parts. In the first part, we'll hear a brief talk from the coordinator of COAP and from the four panelists. In the second part, we have the opportunity to have a question and answer slot to open a dialogue with all of you, the attendees. You have the possibility to write and post your questions along the whole webinar. You'll find at the right side of your screen a box entitled question. You have to post them there. Remember that the questions are going to be answered after the panel. Also, if you wish, you can download the panelist presentation. In the control panel, you find a pane that entitled Handout. You simply have to click on the name of the handout you want to download. Well, now, yes, we are ready to begin. Firstly, we'll hear Dr. Paula Ellman, chair of COAP. She's going to outline the general scope of this committee activities during 2018. But before she begins, I tell you very briefly about throughout her institutional activities. She's a training and supervising analyst in the Contemporary Freudian Society, Washington, D.C., and the IPA. She's overall chair of the COAP, board member of the North American Psychoanalytic Confederation, NAPSAC, assistant clinical professor at the George Washington University School of Professional Psychology, and visiting professor at the Sino-American Continuing Training Project for Wuhan Hospital for Psychotherapy, China. She has written and presented in the areas of female psychology, enactment, terror, sadomasochism, and unconscious fantasies. Now, please, Paula, it's your turn.
Thank you, Ines. Co-op's work provides us with the warm fire of meaning when we're confronting truly challenging times. Women's issues occupy a global stage. Recently in North America, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony was delivered to the US Congress with tremendous integrity and stands as a model for women who have suffered sexual assault. Yet the hostile attacking reactions to Dr. Ford and other victims of Justice Kavanaugh who came forward must not be overlooked. More and more women are claiming their voices. In India, a continent that has long been wanting for a space for women's rights, the Me Too movement is firmly underway, with women coming forward with their testimonies. Yet, in the midst of disappointments with our world's painful limitations, Co-op has the dedication and passion of its members to continue to address globally the interplay of women and gender issues with psychoanalysis. This year, we offered meaningful and well-attended conferences in our 4 IPA regions: Kolkata, India, Monteverde, Uruguay, Tbilisi, Georgia, and Los Angeles, California, where each event tapped the most relevant of that region's women and psychoanalysis concerns. In this webinar, we will hear from presenters discussing their region's topics and issues. Also, in preparation for the next IPA Congress in London, the Feminine, and thanks to the initiative of the IPA website editorial board, Co-op is organizing in each of its 4 regions interviews with prominent women in the culture of that region: artists, film directors, writers, and psychoanalysts. These brief videos, along with the videos from the website editorial board, will be featured on the IPA website beginning in January. So please do visit the website. And thank you for joining us today. I anticipate our international exchange on psychoanalysis and women and gender to be rich and lively.
Now it's the turn of our first panelist, Dr. Juma Besak. Before handing over to her, I would like to say a few words about her professional activities. She's a training analyst of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society, PhD in psychology from the Kyushu University, Japan, Joint Secretary of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society, and member of the International Psychoanalytic Association. She has international publications in journals and books translated into different languages like Japanese, Italian, French, etc., along with papers presented at various IPA congresses. Dr. Besak is the mentor of the Psychoanalytic Study Group, Department of Psychology, Christ University, Bangalore. She is visiting professor at the Ambedkar University, New Delhi, and also visiting faculty in the Department of Psychology, West Bengal State University. Currently, she is the editor of the Journal from the Indian Psychoanalytic Society. Dr. Besak is a consultant at the Woodlands Multispeciality Hospital, Kohala. She's also in private practice. Well, Juma, if you're ready.
The first Co-op International Conference in Kolkata, India was held in March 2018. The theme of the conference was Women's Safety in Dogmatic Times. This theme was decided upon with much reflection on the current socio-cultural and political situation of women's position in the Indian society. The rationale behind the theme. Women's well-being and security in India has often depended on their gender positioning. Historically, women in India have been subjected to various forms of oppression, starting from sex-selective abortions to domestic violence, bride burning for dowry, and acid attacks. Women in India continue to wade through severe threats to their physical safety and survival. These threats to women's security have increased manifold with the progressive polarization and hardening of socio-political and cultural ideologies in recent times. As the spaces for dissent and difference shrink in the Indian context with the present political ruling party, the dogma dominates our public lives. Women find themselves more marginalized than ever before. The promotion of a particular notion of quote-unquote Indian culture is forcing women into traditional roles in which they stand to lose many of their hard-earned freedom, choices, and opportunities. Any attempt to challenge institutional hegemonies of religion, marriage, or heterosexuality is leading to aggressive and punitive assaults. The objective of the conference. Keeping this larger aspect in mind, the conference initiated an interdisciplinary dialogue revolving around psychoanalysis and other social sciences in order to understand the ways in which fundamentalist states of mind contribute to the marginalization of women, often leading to situations of violence and violation. This was also with the hope that psychoanalysis may become more relevant in deepening the understanding, as well as redressal of social inequities, particularly those of gender relations. The conference also aimed to broaden the scope of psychoanalysis to include other socio-cultural perspectives, to enrich its theory and practice in India. Further, it was an initiative to create an entry point for psychoanalysis in mainstream academia in India. Participation. The International Interdisciplinary Co-op Conference had participants from different parts of the world and from India. There were 250 participants altogether, comprising analysts, IPA members, psychologists, psychiatrists, social scientists, scholars, feminist activists, mental health activists, and the student community of analytic candidates and postgraduate PhD students from the field of psychology and social sciences. It was a meeting point for psychoanalysis with the larger clinical fraternity, academia, and the social sector. It was a conference that spread over 2 days, and the sub-themes of the conference were designed to bring multidisciplinary perspectives on particular aspects of dogmatic thought and their impact on women's lives. The effort was to create an interdisciplinary insight examining how women in India experienced marginalization due to growing hardening of ideologies in the different spheres of religion, intimate relationships, motherhood, and including the clinical space. The sub-themes in the conference. 1. The seduction of religion. Religion has always played a very significant role in India, whether as a cementing or a divisive force, an oppressive or a subversive idea. In today's times, religion is increasingly emerging as a site to polarize people and beliefs, to breed suspicion and intolerance. Women being forced into traditional roles prescribed by religious dogma. This segment explored how and why religion was acquiring such an archaic validation in our collective unconscious. The burning concern was, how was it seducing one into such polarized position against each other? The second sub-theme, intimacy and violence. One of the most alarming areas of growing crimes against women in India is the rise in instances of intimate partner violence. Much of the violence seems to get normalized and become an aspect of regular expression of love and ownership in relationships, be it in the family, in conjugality, among lovers. While on the other hand, there are women who try to escape from riots, terrors, and persecution, and at times also to protect their daughters from a similar fate. As an escape route, camps offer shelter to such vulnerable refugees for both women and their children. The third subtheme, fundamentalist states of mind in the clinical space. This was more to investigate countertransferential challenges that the analyst may often encounter in the analytic space within an intimate theatrical battleground of prejudices and discrimination in her or his own interpsychic journey. What kind of persecutory fantasies may challenge the analytic space with psychic fabrications prompted by a punitive superego represented by the ruling party, the state, nation, in the interplay between the analyst and the analysand? And the final point, revisiting motherhood in contemporary times, the intensification of religious fundamentalism and the rhetoric of traditional revival has refocused attention on the conventional construct of motherhood as the epitome of womanhood in India. Their reproductive roles being valorized at the cost of their sexual rights and their right to pleasure. The notion of motherhood in India gains a greater complexity because of its association with the discourse of the nation imagined as Mother India, an image which is being aggressively deployed in contemporary times. As a matter of fact, feminist activists and members of the LGBTQ community present in the conference raised challenging notions of motherhood for India with the lesbian claim over sexuality and coupledom in contemporary Indian society. Conclusion. What times are we living in? Where is our sense of safety? A didactic time that regulates people's thoughts, desires, their essential freedom to eat, wear different attire, love across gender, caste, religion. A time that breeds paranoia in our psyche in constructing notions of the other and eradicating that very own projected perception of one's fantasy-driven persecutory object. Perhaps it is in this crucial juncture of time that psychoanalysis as a discipline may enter a mainstream discourse around socio-cultural and academic paradigm in the Indian context, a time where psychoanalysis may act as an active agent of both clinical theoretical enterprise as well as an equally socio-political tool, which I believe it always has been, to elucidate this changing time. Thank
you. Thank you for your vivid and in-depth outline of the themes and objectives discussed in this first COAP conference held in India. Now I hand over to our second panelist, Dr. Emma Ponce de Leon. Before giving the floor, I would like to give you a little bit of background information about her professional activities. She's a full member and training analyst of the Uruguayan Analytical Association and member of the IPA. She's a psychologist, works with children, adolescents, and adults, and she holds a PhD from the Complutense University of Madrid. She represents Uruguay as liaison member for COAP and was the headquarters director of the former board of FIPOL. She's the founder and director of Clínica del Niño, Her Good Care, an interdisciplinary clinic for the assistance of children and adolescents since 1991. She published many articles in Uruguayan and foreign books and magazines. Her research subjects are psychic constitution, difficulties on symbolization and psychopathology of early childhood, interdisciplinary interventions, parenthood, and adolescent maternity. Well, Emma, it's your turn.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me? I don't hear. Okay. Well, I continue. It was the first dialogue held in Uruguay. I say that a total of 15 institutions participated. NGOs, universities, sociologists, lawyers, medical doctors, social workers were some of the others present. The Ministry of the Interior of Uruguay declared the event of national interest. There were more than 300 participants, including many young people. The main panels were broadcasted live to all Latin America. It was an opportunity to exchange ideas and experiences with colleagues from other disciplines and to engage in a dialogue beyond our office practice. COAP was always focused on issues subject to cultural transformations such as female sexuality and gender. These issues naturally are related to others such as masculinity, parenthood, and for this time childhood was considered from its multiple current social influences as a co-op subject. It was the first time childhood was included. We cannot limit ourselves to an intra-psychic perspective or the significant link of personal experience. Social and cultural factors are determining and building our subjectivities. Social, we are being affected by our social reality, cultural ideals and values. We're surrounded by prejudices, ideologies and paradigms, and at the same time we are players in all of this. From our discussions, we were able to extract the following main themes. In relation to violence and society, we cannot conclude the present is more violent than the past. Important advances have been made since ancient times in culture, science, law, and other areas. However, the world today is full of violence, of all kinds of violence, old and new. There are many ways to look at violence. It's a very broad subject. We believe real or symbolic violence is underlying relations, and it's being expressed through ignorance and subjugation of otherness, intolerance of differences of all kinds, ideological, religious, ethnic, gender, etc., and attempts to submit or eliminate those who are in a minority position of greater dependency or vulnerability. It's an inevitable part of intersubjectivity, and it's a part of relation, power, and domination. Facing the threat of what is different, violence is incarnated in the human being denying the other as a subject of desires. These processes of desubjectivation that affect also those who exercise violence. Today, it has reached unimaginable extremes that often lead to corruption on many levels, inequalities, and social marginalization. Today, there is a certain naturalization of this state of affairs in which exercising and being subject to violence. The government often acts as a multiplier of violence when it mismanages justice and resources. Violence is characterized by the predominance of the act over the world, by the difficulty of representation. We all know this. There is also symbolic violence implicit in the prevailing language and legality, which may act with as much as force as the act itself. Regarding gender violence, some of its forms has been naturalized by the social order, with consequences in the construction of the subjects of each era and establishment of relationship models that have been perpetuated throughout the history of humanity. These models are transmitted from generation to generation in the identification models and throughout parental phantasmatization. The patriarchal system is a producer of gender violence. It implies, among other things, control of the way of life and the sexual body of women, as well as the imposition of legal codes that keep the system in place. It is important to be aware of the influences that gender has on our own psyche and also the incidence of truth imposed by the socio-political power. It is equally important to consider how this relates to psychoanalysis, since it emerged at the time when everything was researched from a male point of view. But nowadays, women are inside interpretative models of history and ideas. Among the many forms of violence that exist against women, the most extreme are the femicide and the feminicide. Femicide refers to ways of symbolically killing the subjectivity of women, while feminicide is the killing of the women in the private or public arena. In Latin America, in 2017, there were 12 feminicides per day. The WHO considers violence against women to be pandemic. The movement Ni Una Menos, No One Less or Not One Woman Less in Latin America can show us how women are changing our society in this field and struggling for their rights and their lives. Likewise, we must understand that violence against women is a concern for men and women alike, and we must think about the construction of subjectivities, both feminine and masculine. Regarding childhood, today children and adolescents are subject to different forms of violence on a daily basis, which manifests itself the school environment, urban insecurity, social networks, among others, with greater exposure and greater risk on the part of girl and female adolescents. Despite the circumstances, the government is not providing sufficient protection, and this creates a traumatic reality that is beyond the intrapsychic processes. Children are victims of chronic and recurrent violence of all kinds, mostly within their immediate environment, and the occurrence increases in critical social context. In 2016, the poverty rate in Latin America was 30.7%. Sexual abuse occurs worldwide, and it's the crime with most impunity. According to UNICEF, in 2017, about 1.1 million children and adolescents in Latin America were victims of sexual violence at some point in their lives. It occurs most frequently in the victim's close circle. The aggressors are usually males, and the victims are mostly girls and adolescent women with a risk of pregnancy. The killing of minors is also of great concern. Unfortunately, there are collective mechanisms of denial and concealment present in these circumstances, since abusers are mostly part of the victim's close circle and are not easily identifiable. Even Freud found it hard to believe that perversion against children was so widespread. Other forms of violence in childhood are abandonment, deprivation, and extreme cruelty. Child protective services have been designed and put in place to end abuse. Some speakers point out, however, that in some cases the institutions have failed to protect children and frequently play a role in multiplying violence. Children who come to these institutions have experienced the unbearable, and in turn they themselves have become unbearable. The institutions cannot really care enough for them, and they are left without protection. To conclude, undoubtedly, violence in its different forms has traumatic effects, both on individuals and the collective, as well as transgenerational. This co-op dialogue allows us to discuss these issues in more detail and to discuss how psychoanalysis might contribute to overcoming prejudice and discrimination, preserving the singularity of desire. Many questions remain open for the entire psychoanalytic community. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, very much. You have highlighted how necessary interdisciplinary contributions are to deal with the different forms of violence. And your final words underlining how many questions still remain open, which is an invitation for all of us to continue working in close contact. Well, now is the turn of our third panelist, Dr. Marion Schoenfeld. Before handing over to her, I would like to give you a little background about her work. Marion is a member of the British Psychoanalytic Association and a British representative to COAP. She has a particular interest in gender and sexuality, also in early trauma and dissociative states. She works in private practice in London, UK. Now, Marion, we hear you.
Thank you. I'm here to talk about the COAP conference on the topic Medea, Femininity, Motherhood, Love and Hate. This is a wonderful conference in the beautiful city of Tbilisi, Georgia, very much worth a visit. Over 100 delegates took part from 22 countries. And our thanks go to the organizers, Katuna Ivanishvili, Gertrud Schlesinger-Kipp, Eva Reichelt, and Christina Sautini. Georgia is the ancient homeland of Medea, a princess and priestess of Colchis, a region in the western part of the country near the Black Sea. And I'll start by briefly recapping the Medea myth. There are numerous versions, and I do not claim to be presenting this in full. The story is perhaps best known via the play by Euripides. Medea has been left by her husband Jason, who is marrying the daughter of the king of Corinth, to further his career. In rage and despair, Medea first sends her 2 sons with a poisoned cloak to kill his new bride and the king, and then kills both her and Jason's children to leave Jason with nothing. Medea finally transcends the mortal world with the help of her grandfather, Helios, the sun god. In Tbilisi, we explored the backstory further. Medea was the daughter of the king of Colchis, a niece of Circe, and a granddaughter of Helios. She was mortal but with links to the gods. There's little reference in mythology to her mother, more to Hecate, the witch goddess, much revered and feared, to whom Medea was a priestess. Medea herself was said to have immense powers as a healer and a destroyer. Medea encounters Jason of Jason and the Argonauts when he comes to Colchis to claim his inheritance and throne by retrieving the golden fleece. Her father promised to give Jason the fleece, but only if he could perform certain tasks which were impossible for an ordinary mortal to achieve. The gods intervened, sending Eros to pierce Medea with his arrow and cause her to fall in love with Jason. In her passion, Medea helped Jason fulfill these tasks with her magical spells and herbs. Jason then took the fleece and sailed away with Medea as he had promised her. Medea distracted her father as they fled by killing and dismembering her brother, a betrayal of her home for family and family for love. Jason and Medea then travel to Greece to take up Jason's inheritance. En route, they encounter numerous challenges, largely handled by Medea's powers, ensuring Jason's heroism, but also involving numerous further murders. As a result, they were banished to Corinth, where they settled for 10 years, until the events detailed in Euripides' play unfold. The conference gradually explored the Medea myth from many different angles: mythology, literature, clinical practice, and modern-day politics. We were reminded by Katuna of the Georgian Society that Freud used myths to develop his map of archaic suppressed desires, which cannot readily be expressed in ordinary everyday language. And Medea takes us into the pre-Oedipal matriarchal world. In terms of theory, attention focused largely on the absence of Medea's birth mother from the myth. Might she be a dead mother, as developed by Andre Green, depressed and silent, unavailable to her daughter? For Medea, the good internal mother is replaced by the magical goddess Hecate, the great mother, powerful, omnipotent, and phallic. Medea's narcissistic delusion leads to the horrors ahead. But before Medea became the murderous mother of the later myth, she was a young girl devoted to Hecate when she met Jason and her life became determined by passion. Katuna again refers to Freud, seeing Medea torn between love for Jason and narcissistic love, with overvaluation of the object and nostalgic love for a return to the mother. Maya Kirchkele from the British Society explored female masochism in the Medea myth, the woman who expresses herself solely through her lover. She betrays her home, family, and her self-expression. In Jason, she is empowering an object of her desire and then submitting to it. Jason's betrayal is an après-coup, where she recognizes her own betrayal. Medea wreaks revenge in recognition that she has turned herself into nothing, and now she turns Jason into nothing. Her murder of her children is a disavowal of a loving maternal self, and the infanticidal Medea exemplifies the fulfillment of a need for punishment at the hands of a parental power. The internal split allows murder on instruction of the superego as a punishment for her own betrayal. Rosella Valdre from Italy has written about malicious intimacy resulting in toxic couples in modern-day popular literature. Most famous example perhaps being Gone Girl, the story of a murderous couple who cannot be together, yet nor can they ever leave each other. In Tbilisi, she spoke about Medea and Jason as such a toxic couple, where there is excessive idealization within the couple relationship, with projection into the other and resulting depletion of the self. Having to face the unbearable evacuated parts in the other seems to allow no solution other than to kill. She too traces this pattern back to early childhood trauma, in particular the absence of the mother. And she identifies the conflicts in women's love for men, a theme developed further by Endel Talvik from Estonia, who thought and spoke about Medea as one of a line of femme fatale of ancient Greece, also Medusa, the Gorgons, and Circe. Medea was murderous, but the mere sight of Medusa turned men into stone. His modern take on this metamorphosis into dangerous, castrating, or murderous monsters was as a reaction to male abuse and dangerous male sexual desires. Of these, only Circe did not kill. She simply turned men into animals, in fact pigs, and she alone was not actually raped or abused, and therefore retains control and can manage men. He draws comparisons with the Me Too campaigns, and proposes that all women have an alluring side which turns men into pigs. The pigs bring out Gorgon-like rage, fear of penetration and sexual abuse in women. He sees women's sexuality as torn between the need to be desired versus the fear of abuse. Not surprisingly, many of the conference papers focused on Medea as the murderous mother. How could she possibly kill her own children? How might this be understood? Jones De Luca from Italy explored the apparent impossibility of conceptualizing feelings of intolerance towards one's children. Elizabeth Schuyler from Austria used the Medea myth to explore the fear of female violence, which is still easily overlooked, because mothers are idealized for fear of the mother of early infancy who rules over life and death. Female violence is rare, but dreaded, the flip side of idealization. And Gamze Özgürüz from Turkey focused more on female perversion, reflecting further on Lady Macbeth in addition to Medea and drawing comparisons. She draws on Estella Welton's conceptualizations on the expression of perversion in women via their own bodies and, by extension, that of their children. Medea thus used her children as dehumanized part objects to enact her revenge against her husband. Marianne Leutzinger-Bohleber from Germany reported on her work with refugee women, expanding her theory of the Medea fantasy, which she developed in the 1990s in the context of working with women with psychogenic frigidity and sterility. And these women show, and I quote, unconscious conviction that sexual passion carried the risk of existential dependence on their love partner and of eventual deception and abandonment by him, which they would not be able to endure, and would thus react with lethally destructive impulses, constituting an existential danger to themselves and their children. This fantasy was associated with severe early trauma, in particular maternal postnatal depression and an absent mother. However, she observed similar patterns in her more recent work with refugees experiencing contemporary trauma. Although migration itself is not always traumatic, in the case of refugees, there's highly likely to be separation, loss, and disruption, loneliness, loneliness and a feeling of not belonging. And the refugee loses a psychic skin or container provided by the culture. The feelings of powerlessness can result in a collapse of trust and any confidence in the empathic shield provided by primary good internal objects and then of mature mental functioning. And Marianne has seen women who have wanted to give away, if not actually murder their children, and spoke of how difficult the countertransference is to bear in such cases. And Tatiana Pushkaryova from Ukraine also explored the Medea fantasy based on her work with children. She reported on her observations of pregnant women with perinatal depression, including cases of death in childbirth, where it seemed as if unconscious destructive fantasies of a murderous baby and her mother prevailed. Both could not survive. She too saw that unconscious, aggressive, and destructive impulses may interfere with maternal attachment from pregnancy onwards, most commonly when they feel unprotected by their partners. So this is just a brief overview of some of the main themes presented in Tbilisi, emphasizing the central and even overwhelming role of failures in the maternal role. These were explored in other ways, including Juliet Mitchell's Law of the Mother, were exploring the mother as subject responsible for creating and enforcing the social order, which failed so markedly for Medea. We heard feminist and mythological readings on Medea as the great mother and the mother goddess, and the spirit spoke of the inhibition of creativity in women, related to fear of women's own aggression and murderousness, where might it lead? And how to repair irreparable damage. Where could Medea go after a final destruction, but to join the gods in madness? These themes were also taken up in films. We spoke of Pasolini's film with Maria Callas and Lars von Trier's Medea. And overall, we're talking about the failure, the importance of the maternal role. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your review of the multiple signification condensed in the Medea myth. It provides a way of exploring really extreme situations and sometimes unbearable emotions related to motherhood and to femininity. Well, thank you. Now comes the turn of our fourth and final panelist, Dr. Andrea Kahn. Before giving the floor to her, I would like to tell you briefly about her bio. She's a member of the Psychoanalytic Center of California. In 2017, she was appointed to her position on COAP and recently served as chair of COAP 2018 conference, chair of the IPA Nominating Committee for North America from 2016 and since 2012. PCC representative in the Confederation of Independent Psychoanalytic Societies since 2012, currently holds the office of Vice President. Member of North America Tavistock Observation Leaders in private practice for over 40 years in Los Angeles, California. Well, Andrea, we hear you now.
The 2018 Co-op Conference, Psychic Survival in the Face of Misogyny, The Dialectic Between the Internal and External Glass Ceiling, was held in LA in November 9th and 10th, 2018. In the Me Too era, where each day seems to reveal more and more instances of misogyny across every industry and facet of life, we felt the timing could not have been better to explore this extremely important subject and how we as analysts can confront this issue with our patients and ourselves. The three IPA societies in Los Angeles, PCC, Psychoanalytic Center of California, Los Angeles Institute for the Study of Psychoanalysis, and the New Center came together to sponsor the event and feature the first ever female IPA elected president, the esteemed Dr. Virginia Unger. The program for the conference was designed to fulfill one of Dr. Unger's most important mandates, to make psychoanalysis relevant to the community by bringing the analysts out of our offices and into the community at large. We brought together speakers to represent different voices from media to Hollywood to social policy, academia, politics, and even athletics. This conference was designed to bring together as many voices as possible to learn and dialogue on the issues of misogyny and the glass ceiling, internally and externally. The weekend created an opportunity for analysts and mental health care professionals to interface with these community members and develop a common language in discussion on misogyny in order to foster greater understanding and communication. This issue, misogyny and the internal-external glass ceiling, goes beyond Los Angeles. It's national, it's international. It's in big cities and small towns and permeates every single profession, industry, and space of daily life. In Los Angeles alone, we've seen the effects of gender inequality, sexual harassment, and assault throughout the industry that is commonly referred to as Hollywood. Our audience was comprised of attendees from San Francisco, where women in the tech space had faced numerous hurdles, and the week prior to the conference had organized an employee walkout from Google, one of the biggest companies in the world. We had speakers and participants from New York, where misogyny is rampant in the financial industry, and where many of the first actual court cases of the Me Too era are now progressing toward trial. Our visitors from Washington, D.C. brought firsthand experience how misogyny and patriarchy have infested our politics, and we all see it play out every night on cable news and minute to minute in and on social media. The diverse group of speakers with very different backgrounds, all whom shared experiences of misogyny and the limitations of the glass ceiling imposes on women, and that women sometimes impose on themselves, spoke to these issues and opened the conversation. The dialogue continued to form through panel discussions initiated by the speakers and several periods of audience participation through questions to answers and sharing insights. The dialogue was further encouraged throughout breakout discussions in small groups led by the facilitators. In addition to papers and presentations, we were fortunate to bring the work of a young group of documentary producers, Girl Crew Collective, to the conference and feature an original Me Too video they had recently produced. The conference was brought to a conclusion also by a UCLA gymnast who read her original poetry on the themes of safety, aggression, sexual assault, and misogyny in the world of sports. To reiterate, the goal of the two-day conference was to expand awareness of the issue beyond what is social and political and explore the personal and internal glass ceiling experience of persevering in the face of misogyny. Through the interdisciplinary and intersectional lens, the theme Psychic Survival in the Face of Misogyny, a dialectic between the internal and external glass ceiling, was discussed in relation to both current events and psychoanalytic themes. Our overriding goal as psychoanalysts, healthcare professionals, educators, and members of a greater community beyond our offices was to create an environment of openness around these difficult issues that face women by creating dialogue and tools and awarenesses gained by attendees helps our clients face their own individual experience and result in greater gender parity. 250 participants came from up and down the California coast, Seattle, New Orleans, New York, and Washington, D.C. These registrants represented the analytic and mental health community, members and candidates of IPA and non-societies, psychology students, social policy advocates, entertainment executives, professionals, undergraduate students, and gymnasts from the neighboring university. And with the backdrop of a devastating fire that was raging around us, we came together to dialogue and expand the conversation on misogyny and the glass ceiling. Our first speaker was Dana Calvo, a former executive producer of the series Good Girls Revolt and Narcos. She was a journalist and presently is an independent producer. She spoke on breaking the glass ceiling, where women writers and producers have many more obstacles barring success. Her show, Good Girls Revolt, specifically revolved around the dilemma for women in the workplace that continues 50 years after Eleanor Holmes Norton filed the first sex discrimination suit in the country, representing the women from Newsweek magazine. She also touched on the importance of women mentoring other women while not creating a hate movement against men. Our keynote was delivered by Dr. Virginia Unger. Her paper entitled The Analyst and the Internal Glass Ceiling showed that the psychological shift entailed for both sexes is a task in developing a new culture, expressing that a woman is no longer to be viewed as an object to be defined by a man for a man, but as an individual on her own right. Stephen Friedman, president of Societal Impact for SY Partners and past president of MTV, an Emmy and Peabody Award winner for his socially conscious programming, spoke on Where Do Men Stand Now? His speech centered around hypermasculinity, which includes hypersexuality and the suppression of feelings, along with the glorification of risk, aggression, and physical strength. He showcased how the man in the box is prone to a higher risk of suicide, as well as acts of bullying and sexual harassment. He exposed the ways men may feel threatened by women, becoming more confident in their roles and feeling a loss for being in a different place in society. Part of his antidote to hypermasculinity is figuring out a way to help men understand that their nurturing side is not unmasculine, and helping younger males by mentoring and modeling this behavior. And finally, Dr. Adrienne Harris, training and supervising analyst and prolific writer, addressed the fate of masculine-feminine today. She addressed the power and pain that gender shifts have created for our culture today, where envy and hatred of the other play out. For a long time, many women, when faced with power, have undercut their own strength, disguising it in a coquettish way by holding on to a childlike state against the fear of attack that can come when men's anxieties over their competency are challenged. In this situation, it isn't uncommon for aggression to get stirred. Allowing vulnerability and dependence have been historically viewed by society as unmanly and has kept men in this universal box, pushing them to sacrifice intimacy and needs for entitled masculinity. The afternoon panel brought the conference to a close with insightful questions, thought-provoking conversation, and a sense that this dialogue has moved forward and will continue. Thank you.
Much, Andrea. Thank you for this outline of this important and open dialogue with the community. No doubt it has given a better understanding of the situation and has provided new tools to confront with misogyny and the so-called glass ceiling effect. Well, now we have finished the presentations and begins the second part of our webinar. Remember, the attendees, that you might write and post your questions in the box at the right side of the screen. I begin reading a first question. This is a question addressed to Yuma. Of course, the other panelists might add and comment afterwards. In such a context for women as you describe in India, how is the situation of women analysts?
Can you come again, please? I missed
Yes.
the first section.
I'm trying to send it so you can read it.
Okay.
The second, please.
Yeah.
In such a context for women, as you describe in India, how is the situation of women analysts?
Okay. The initial beginning of psychoanalysis in India was predominantly male-driven. As a matter of fact, the first two generations have been extremely, we only find male analysts. It is only currently now that we find that there are more women analysts, female analysts coming into the scene. Students, candidates who are going for training are mostly women who are coming for analytic training. So there has been a shift now happening, quite a visible shift actually.
I wonder if you could also speak more, Juma, about the kind of pressures that women analysts are enduring in their current, in the current culture of India.
Thanks, Paula. I think that helps to talk about the layers within the society that women analysts have to work. I think, of course, compared to the previous time, psychoanalysis in India is very much thriving. There is a lot of awareness, especially by the youth community. So comparatively, there has been a shift, but there are various layers through which one has to work. One, of course, is larger political area where I think one has to constantly work with prejudices regarding religion, caste, gender, of course, very strongly. These three is a constant quality of negotiation and the working arena. Also, a different layer of work comprises in the cultural aspect where one is still struggling to be able to talk about very private matters in a professional setup. Once again, I must qualify that comparatively, even if we look at the last 10 years or more, there has been a major shift. There has been a dynamic shift in the Indian scenario, and highly deserves that mention. But it is still still a quality that one has to negotiate quite consciously while working with one's clients. And of course, the other would be the clinical space, where I think as analysts, I think this is also very common to a whole lot of different countries, where one has to negotiate the hierarchy of other clinical practitioners like psychiatrists in hospital setups, even governmental hierarchies, where psychoanalysis has to negotiate still a lot within this country. Laws which are not open to psychoanalysis, as would be other therapy schools.
Do you want the panelists to add any comment? No? Well, so I'm going to read a second question addressed in general to all of you. How can psychoanalytic theory catch up with the reality of change in roles of mother, fathers, and children, and the realities of child rearing around the world nowadays? I'll read it again. How can psychoanalytic theory catch up with the reality of change in roles of mothers, fathers, and children, and the realities of child rearing around the world nowadays? Who wants to begin?
Emma, do you have any thoughts about that, given the focus of the conference that included childhood in Uruguay?
Could you write the precise answer, the question?
Yeah. I'm trying to send it to your to your screen. I didn't get it yet.
I certainly think the question is quite worthy of all of our thinking. How can psychoanalysis keep up with the changes in motherhood and mothering and childhood today, and certainly in gender diversities today, which affect parenting? I see this as an opportunity for me to bring awareness to a gender diversities study summit. Both co-op and the Committee on Sexual and Gender Diversity Study is planning to have in Brussels in I think it's the weekend of September 27th. And this is where these opportunities to gather together to study together the changes that we are confronted with in our culture. Typically, that focus will be on gender diversities, but certainly gender diversities is inclusive of changes in parenting, where that have come about through changes in our culture related to gender diversities and the trans culture. So I think we do have some catching up work to do ourselves with what had previously been diagnostic categories in our, and even in treating homosexuality, that we do have work to do to catch up our thinking with allowing for more inclusiveness around diversity.
Mm-hmm. Do the
Yes.
other panelists want to participate? Yes?
Yes, I think that it's a very important challenge because we have many clinical and theoretical work on these subjects from always, and the position of the analyst in front of this problem, I think it was always of respect and not to have in mind changing the position of a girl or a boy that feels himself from a different gender. We work on depression, on dysphoria, on what we see. I think that we always take this into very present in our work. But in fact, nowadays we see many things that we have to rethink our theories. For example, in laws are changing, and we see that it is now facilitated to give hormonal treatments for very young children, and and changes of sex in adolescents. And we think that this is a very, very important subject for analysts to give our opinion on that, because we have a very long clinical experience on the consequences of this kind of interventions, medical interventions. So we are in a culture that is changing a lot, and it's changing very fast in topics that we have a lot of clinical experience, and we can rethink with the changes, with the new things, but also with what we knew from all our clinical practice. So it's a great challenge, I think.
I'm wondering if Marion, did any discussions come up in Tbilisi conference on motherhood and the impact of cultural changes on motherhood?
Well, we didn't, if I can speak, we didn't speak so much about cultural changes in motherhood, but certainly Mariana Boleva's work with refugees was bringing in the tensions that mothers experience on a very extreme end. But what I was actually thinking about, because I have got a mythological hat on at the moment, is that yes, there are many changes in current behavior and in current cultural patterns, but there is also the issue that there are underlying archaic, unconscious processes influencing that, and that perhaps we do as analysts need to remember that and look at how is this being expressed at the moment. Because one of the things that was really quite striking with the Medea conference was that this very ancient myth had so much relevance to modern day culture and modern day society.
Well, any other comment? Or we pass to the next question. Second, please. It seems that violence against women is worse when women decide to become more free and exercise their agencies. This is when they are healthier. Don't you think we have to include this reaction this reaction in our analysis? I read it again. It seems that violence against women is worse when women decide to become more free and exercise their agency. This is when they are healthier. Don't you think we have to include this reaction in our analysis?
May I ask?
Mhm.
Yes, I completely agree. I think that from the side of psychoanalysis, it's very important to allow the appropriation of aggressiveness in the service of life as a resource facing different forms of violence in the lives, and to participate if one wishes in the struggle for one's rights. You know that the last week, for example, this is not an example of the office, but last week in Argentina, a collective association of actresses has born to support a young actress who told in TV the way she was raped at 16 by an actor that shared work with her. This man had other accusations for sexual abuse from this cast for the castmates, his castmates, and these are important changes that are happening. And I think that from our clinical work, we have also a responsibility supporting women in these positions.
Okay.
I think when the comment was that there's more violence when women attempt to have a voice, have an active voice. I guess
Yes.
it's important to consider is whether they're even before the subjugation of women, before when they are complicit.
Yes.
This is still a condition of violence. It would be a violence destroying the subjectivity, the internal world of the woman. And so it's not clear to me that there is not violence going on when women are not yet taking a voice. That I think the violence is going on to the internal subjective world of the woman. It may not be as obvious or as active in the public sphere, but it is a destructive violence nonetheless.
May I add
Yes.
to what Paula just said? I think definitely from the Indian context, what Paula, you just mentioned is very much applicable, is that even when one is not voicing, there is definitely in the Indian context a social, cultural, very structured form of violence, which works like a shield of silence. So it takes a very long time to be able to find articulation. And I think one of the growing reasons of, let's say, very apparent public violence on women in India on road, very visible public violence, is because there is a shift happening in the Indian scenario where women are really finding that articulation. And we see it at different layers, and including, I would believe, in the psychoanalytic discipline itself.
How do you mean including the psychoanalytic discipline? What are you thinking of?
I think the next generation of psychoanalysts who are coming, some of the candidates that we see across India are extremely dynamic, very, very articulate, very demanding, which is also a shift from perhaps our generation of women analysts. Yes, there is a change happening, and a lot more women analysts are I mean, we see more of women analysts in India now, but I think there's a qualitative shift further happening with the next generation of candidates, which we see across the country.
I think I just wanted to address it. I do think that's what one of the issues that we were trying to explore was what was happening to women internally that kept them from having a voice, and to open that up for in our practices, and to be more aware of it, how not just what we do to ourselves, but what we've internalized and perpetuate in our ourselves and in our voices. Unfortunately, in LA and across the states now, we have not only the Me Too movement, but Time's Up, and it is really helping women of all cultures and all socioeconomic status to have a voice or to stand up to the violence, whether it's in the workplace or in the home.
I read now another question on the same line. In my clinical experience with the Mexican women, I have heard many stories of mistreatment of parents, close relatives, and couples. What has struck me is the variety of meaning into their psychic realities. Could you comment more on this topic, please?
Could you repeat it once more, please?
Yes. In my clinical experience with Mexican women, I have heard many stories of mistreatment of parents, close relatives, and couples. What has struck me is the variety of meanings in their psychic realities. Could you comment more on this topic?
On the psychic meanings of the mistreatment, of the violence.
The meanings in internal words.
Internal, yeah.
Different fantasies.
Certainly, I mean, I'm interested to hear many of our panelists about the different psychic meanings in the mind. Certainly, I can myself associate to one important psychic meaning that could be relevant in many instances, and that is the general reaction to and fear of the omnipotent maternal object, that in terms of envy, in terms of the impulse to destroy, the too powerful maternal imago, both for women and men, that there's something about the early life position, these powerful maternal imago, that can engender a wish to assert one's own power, and a wish to, and as a reaction to the envy of the power of the mother, of the internalized mother. That's of a potential psychic meaning.
Yes, and the consequences we see in our clinic of this that you said, Paula, is great problems of self-esteem and depression that accompany many aspects of life of women that have been abused or much mistreated.
So are you talking, Emma, about the reactions to
Yes.
early life abuse?
Mhm.
Yes, the consequences of these psychic feelings of the internal world.
Are there other thoughts?
Can we go
Marion?
on?
Well, Marion,
Yes.
do you have a thought about?
Well, I did have a thought because it links your statement links with the previous question about the impact of changes in parenting and so on, and it makes you wonder, because I thought you were actually talking not necessarily about abuse in childhood, but just the general situation of the helpless infant. Even with a good mother, a good father, there's still that sense of helplessness that carries on. And of course, the helplessness is greatest towards the mother, who is so central. And that makes me wonder whether there could be some change if the mother is no longer so central or so solely central, that perhaps what happens if the parenting is taken over more by fathers? What role does that have on gender relations later on? They're just thoughts.
Interesting points.
I'm going to read this says that it's not a question, just a comment. It's very good to have this webinar, especially for all those who, like myself, were not able to go to recent very special co-op conferences, as well as putting together the experiences of the key points in these countries, which are also basic questions for all women. So thank you.
I think that is our hope in having this panel, is to bring to the larger membership the areas that we were able to address in different regions that could be relevant for more than that region, certainly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I read to you another question. Is social violence against women perceived by them as an inevitable, not justifiable behavior by men? I'll repeat it. Is social violence against women perceived by them as an inevitable behavior by men?
Well, I think that we were telling how this is changing. I think that this is true, that many women have been feeling this, but this is changing in certain cultures, in certain different countries, but still this is a problem. I think that we are changing, but we have this problem that many women feel like this.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe, as you were saying, Juma, I mean, I think there are facets of, certainly in the culture of India and in many cultures, that may lend itself to an expectation of social violence that are embedded in different regions, gender cultures, religious cultures, that I think it is incumbent on us to study them and to understand them in such a way that it isn't just expected because it's woven into certain socio-historical regions.
once again, Paula, to respond to what you just said. In the Indian context, I think notions of masculinity, which is embedded in mythologies, in religious gods, I think plays a very, very important role in our sense of male subjectivity and the woman looking at the man as well. And that definitely creates layers of complications and complexities in the gender formation.
I myself do feel optimistic about our psychoanalytic and our cultural efforts to change some of what I think has been taken for granted in many of our cultures in Latin America and North America, in the East.
Well, may I pass to the next question? Can anyone comment about institutional prejudice against women analysts?
In psychoanalytic societies, institutions, the question is for us
Yes,
in
of
our
course.
Yes, that's a very provocative question.
Yes.
With very different answers depending on the country, no?
Yes.
Here in Buenos Aires, most of us are women.
yes.
And it's great with us
Yes,
too.
I think that's happening internationally, that there are more women becoming psychoanalysts, but certainly in America, and as we heard Juma saying earlier, in India, that earlier generations of psychoanalysts were predominantly male, and whether because of that origin of maleness in psychoanalysis, whether there may be threads of gender stereotypes or gender prejudices that may still be carried on. I think it's a very important question.
Well, also in the in the 60s and 70s in North America, before psychologists could be trained as psychoanalysts, there were more medical doctors, and it corresponded to women being able to get into medical school. And while there were some women analysts, psychoanalysts in the early days, or many here in this country, there weren't as many as men, and now it's increased with the expansion of psychoanalysis being opened up to psychologists and social workers and other disciplines.
But it is an important question whether there are certain prejudices that psychoanalysis continues carrying on. I mean, certainly it is incumbent on us to reflect on the fact that this is the first term where we've had a female IPA president. And I think we need to be curious about that. Why it's taking this long.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we have come to an end. I want to thank you for all the panelists for your presentations and all your comments, and to all of you, the attendees, that who have made this webinar such a productive exchange of ideas. But before leaving, I would like to invite you to our next webinar, the first one of 2019. This space will provide members with the opportunity to meet IPA's 2021 presidential candidates before starting the voting on March. Remember, so Next webinar on Sunday, the 27th January 2019. Meet with the presidential candidates. We are waiting for all of you. Well, thank you very much. I have to leave now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.